I have some great guys in that class that I really admire. Karl Malone, Dennis Johnson.
As much as we all love watching NBA games, all the shenanigans that happen behind the scenes are just as entertaining. A star player can make or break a team, which is why NBA drafts and trades are one of the most important aspects of the game. In this video, we'll be taking a look at some strange, crazy, or simply bad trades made by teams in the NBA. So here are the 5 weirdest trades in NBA history.
Continue to make evaluations, and then we'll do what we think is best from there.
Number 5. John Spoelstra to the Indiana Pacers. Usually, when we're talking about NBA trades, we mean players traded for another player. Well, this one's certainly unique in that regard. John Spoelstra is actually not a basketball player. He's the father of Erik Spoelstra and a former NBA executive. In 1983, the Portland Trail Blazers were looking for new players, specifically a new point guard. They had their eye on Don Buse of the Indiana Pacers. The problem was that the Trailblazers didn't want to lose any of their own valuable players just to get Buse. At that time, the Pacers were looking to expand their own brand using high-profile players. Eventually, a light bulb went off, and John Spoelstra, who was a Portland GM at the time, offered himself to the Pacers in exchange for Buse. Since John Spoelstra was an experienced marketing executive and the Pacers needed to expand their brand, the deal eventually went through. And it was the first time in NBA history that an executive was traded for a player. It wasn't a bad deal for the Pacers. At the time, nearly every single team in the NBA was bleeding money, and the Trailblazers were one of the only teams that weren't, thanks to Spoelstra's expertise. For the Trailblazers, though, the deal wasn't that great. Don Buse was an incredible point guard at his peak, but by the time he went to the Trailblazers, he was well out of his prime and performed poorly game after game. He ended up being transferred to the Kansas City Kings next year before he finally retired in 1985 due to poor performance.
7 seconds.
Number 4. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was one of the star players for UCLA during his college career. He ended up being drafted to the Milwaukee Bucks in 1969, but it was clear that he eventually wanted to play for his hometown team, the LA Lakers. With Kareem as their star player, the Milwaukee Bucks won their first and only NBA championship to date in 1971. It was obvious that Kareem was too valuable to let go, and the mere thought of a trade was considered absurd by fans, since the team was at the peak of its popularity, finances, and performance, all thanks to Kareem. To the displeasure of those Bucks fans, Kareem eventually requested to be traded to either the Knicks or the LA Lakers. The Bucks agreed to trade him and Walt Wesley in exchange for Elmore Smith, Brian Winters, Dave Myers, and Junior Bridgman. The players the Bucks acquired were decent, but there were no Kareem. Suddenly, the Bucks became much less popular, their performance was dwindling, and they never won an NBA title again. As for the Lakers, they won the lottery with Kareem. Just like the Bucks, Kareem became the star player of the Lakers and ended up carrying the team to 5 championship wins. This was probably one of the most one-sided trades in NBA history, but the Bucks didn't have much of a choice since Kareem didn't want to play with them anymore. He didn't ever speak badly of the team or the fans and was actually quite appreciative of the experience, but he said that the Midwest didn't suit his cultural needs, and he needed to be in a place like New York or Los Angeles where he would feel more comfortable with himself.
Thank you.
Number 3. Scottie Pippen to the Bulls. Now this is one of those trades that make you take another look and go, really? In the case of the Bucks at least, they had no choice but to trade Kareem. But have you ever heard of a team trading one of the best players on the planet for someone relatively useless? That's exactly what the Seattle Supersonics did. In 1987, Pippen was one of the most sought-after college graduates for the NBA draft. Every team wanted him, knew he would end up being a star. He was the 5th overall pick in that year's draft and was picked by the Seattle Supersonics, but they ended up immediately trading him with the 8th overall pick, Olden Polynice, from the Chicago Bulls, a name we bet you probably haven't heard before. Eventually, Pippen went on to perform well with the Bulls. He, along with Michael Jordan, transformed the Bulls from a small-time contender to one of the most successful teams in NBA history. With he and Jordan as star players, the Bulls ended up winning 6 NBA championships and were the most successful NBA team of the 90s. Scottie Pippen ended up becoming an NBA Hall of Famer and the first person to ever win an NBA championship and an Olympic gold medal in the same year in 1992. As for Olden Polynice, he did what he had to do, which was play basketball. He had pretty much no notable milestones in his career and was usually low profile during his time with the Supersonics. The Supersonics never won a championship after trading him, which is horrifying to look at in hindsight, considering Pippen helped the Bulls win 6 championships. Then the Seattle Supersonics eventually were sold and shut down in 2008.
Legend, number 6, Bill Russell.
Number 2, Bill Russell to Boston. Not only is this trade strange in hindsight, but it also gives you an idea about the mindset of NBA teams at the time, when they were willing to sacrifice performance for racism. Bill Russell is one of the most recognizable names in the history of basketball. A true pioneer, there's no question that Russell was among the best basketball players of his time. Bill Russell had already become a big name in basketball after he led his team to 2 NCAA championships in 1955 and 1956. Prior to the NBA draft of '56, the Harlem Globetrotters set their sights on Russell, but the owner of the Globetrotters would not contact Russell directly due to his race, which enraged him, and he ended up making himself available for the draft instead. During the draft, every team had their eyes on Russell, including the Celtics, but he was eventually the 2nd overall pick and was drafted by the St. Louis Hawks, who had no intention of using an African American on their team. They just picked Russell so that they could trade him for some white players, which they did. On the day of the draft, Russell was traded to the Celtics for Ed McCauley and Cliff Hagan. Aside from Russell, the Hawks also traded K.C. Jones, another black player they had no intention of using. None of the players taken in by the St. Louis Hawks made any sort of impact on the sport, while both K.C. Jones and Russell ended up becoming some of the most successful basketball players of all time, and they both entered the NBA Hall of Fame. While Russell played with the Celtics, he led the team to win 11 NBA championships. The Hawks never won a championship again, and even lost to a Russell-led Celtic team in the 1961 finals.
You know, you can ask any girlfriend I've ever had.
Number 1, Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to the Nets. If you can't beat them, buy them. At least that's what seemed to be the attitude of the Brooklyn Nets' new owner, Mikhail Prokhorov. The billionaire bought a majority stake in the Nets back in 2010 and soon decided he wanted to make his team more powerful by any means. He wanted the Nets to be in contention for the NBA championships and decided to take some shortcuts for it. While their team was already great, he decided what the team really needed was Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Even though they were both good players, it was clear that these two were well past their prime at the point. In exchange for them and a few other players, the Nets parted ways with Gerald Wallace, Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, Chris Joseph, and Keith Bogans, some of their most valuable players. They also gave up their first-round picks to the Boston Celtics for 3 years. Pierce left the Nets after just 1 season, joining the Washington Wizards. Kevin Garnett was traded to the Timberwolves after less than 2 seasons with the Nets. Jason Terry played for 1 season before being sold to the Sacramento Kings the next season. DJ White was picked up simply to fill the salary cap. None of the players helped the Nets reach any milestone. They failed to qualify for any championship despite their owners' deep pockets. On the other hand, the Celtics became one of the best teams in the NBA and were consistently outperforming the Nets in practically every regard. While the trade might not have seemed bad at the time, today it's considered one of the biggest steals in NBA history. So that's a wrap for the 5 weirdest trades in NBA history. Can you try to make sense of any of these trades? Well, let us know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and we'll see you next time.